Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lay It on the Table. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mahaffey. With me today, of course, is my partner in crime,
James Englehart. Good to be here. Thank you, Joe.
Oh, it's awesome to do this number 2. So we got the first one in the can, origin
Doing
stories.
number 2 is always a good feeling.
That is also true. Thanks. We talked about the dad jokes in the pre-show banter, and I think that's kind of where we are.
Carries through.
But our first episode was launched today on Anchor and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which means it will pretty much be available anywhere that you listen to podcasts on your normal platform. So we appreciate you folks listening in. The first one I called Origin Stories because that's what we started talking about was how we got into gaming. But so now we're going to kind of take it into the next level. And I think that's going to be fun for us to get those themes kind of going and getting all the distribution things set up. I will tell you right now, you're not hearing a lot of music that kind of leads us in and leads us out right now because I haven't quite figured it out with Epidemic Sound. I have an Epidemic Sound licensing for the game, which also has its own unique podcast channel, and it looks like I'm going to have to work with them a little bit before I'll figure that out. And I decided, you know what? I'm not going to let that get in the way because that gives us some time to figure some things out. So that's number one.
Thanks for doing that legwork, Joe. I appreciate that.
Well, you know, it's just it's important to me that whatever we do, that the artists that did the work get the credit. And so using something like Epidemic Sound, make sure that the licensing is done properly, that we can play it here, it can show up on YouTube, and the person that actually did the creative work gets the 35 cents or whatever it is. That's probably very generous.
Super important.
Later in our episode, we are going to have a guest interview. Nate Bivins, the author and publisher of Sundae Split, will be joining us, and I'll put it up here so that it focuses on that. There you go. As well as a bunch of other games. And I think it's Silver River, OP Arena, Book of Dragons, Stonehenge. So we're going to talk to him in a little bit, but today, James, what has been going on with you from a gaming perspective, sir?
So this has been we're getting towards the end of the school year where I'm teaching. And so we've got a little break over the holiday, and my partner and I, Laura, have had a chance to get a couple of games to the table. That's been a lot of fun. Just a short list. We've been playing Sanssouci, had some friends over to play Power Grid, Bandito, and Silver, and then had a 2-player extravaganza yesterday of playing Honey Buzz, which we found out. We looked back through the records, and the last time we played Honey Buzz, she was about to give birth to our child 3 days later. So she did a whole lot better this time and crushed me. So,
well, you know, so that's interesting. So Honey Buzz. Or no, not so much the Honey Buzz, but you're keeping the record. Talk about that, because I know a number of folks that have the different apps that they track the game they played, who they played with, what was their score, what was everybody else's score. And we don't really do that. And I'm curious, do you do that for every game? And how does that inform what you play next or when you play that game again or any of that?
Right. So, I mean, I joined BGG in 2007.
Yep.
And one of their little functionalities is you can, and part of it was just to keep track of all of the games that you have. And then, and then I was like, oh, well, it's also just good to see what of the collection, what are the things that I've got, what have I played, and with who. I don't keep track of what the score was. I don't keep track of who won.
Okay.
This is who I played with, where I played it, and who was there. I'm not really interested in the score.
Right.
I think I can tell you who won each of the games I just ran down. But outside of, I think we played Silver twice. We played it with friends. We had friends over for Power Grid, Bandito, and Silver. And I lost Silver spectacularly. Like I just absolutely, this got this mechanism where you can, pull a card and then flip over cards that you think are the same and sort of swap them out. And I failed several times and just had an incredible, terrible score. So that was fantastic. But otherwise, no, it's just to see like, what have I played? How many times am I playing the games? I have a lot of games in the collection. So how many times do I play them? Who am I playing them with? And it just seems like a fun way then to look back like, oh, this month we played a whole lot of games and last month we played very few. And so what was going on? And it's just a nice way to sort of sync up what I'm doing with sort of what I'm doing at the table, as well as what I'm doing in life. And you can look back. It's like, when various social media will sort of send a little note to you and say, hey, here's what happened a year ago. You're like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing, or 5 or 8 years, whatever. And so it's just kind of, it's a nice way to keep track of those things. But the scores are not important to me, and who wins and who doesn't, but who I'm playing with and what games get to the table. That seems kind of fun to keep track of.
Well, that's a nice way to think about it. And then, that's perhaps something I can get behind, being a little bit more disciplined around what did I play and who did I play with, as opposed to who won. I mean, obviously it's my wife, Dale, and I, we play. It's usually the two of us. We are trying to get back out there. Unfortunately, I don't have a laundry list for you in the last couple of weeks, just because, the holidays happened and both of us kind of had a bit of an injury. And I think you're aware a little bit of that. But we're on the mend. Everything is good. And of course we're traveling around and seeing some family stuff. And we didn't, normally we'll take a game down to her parents. We didn't do that this go around. But I was interested that you were playing Bandito because,
it's a giant game in a little box.
No, I well, I have it, and I've played it, and it's what I like about it. It's one of the few single player games you can play.
Oh yeah.
But it sounded like you might have played it with a larger group, or as opposed to
it was 3 of us. Laura was putting Emerson to bed, as it turns out. And so the 3 of us are like, okay, we just finished Power Grid, and let's do something while that's going on. So, and we've played it, Laura and I played it with our daughter, Wendy, but at an outdoor setting. And you really do have to have a lot of space to be able to play Bandito.
No, that's fair. But I also think of it the way you describe it. It's almost like we're going to cleanse the palate between these courses. Oh, yeah. And so Bandito will be the sorbet.
It's a filler. Yeah. That's almost the definition of filler, right? Like, this is super simple. You just draw a card, and it's nice because it's a co-op. So you're trying to catch the bandit there. And
hey, I know this is like, you're always going to get ADD Joe when I say you have ADD Joe this go around. Speaking of co-ops, did you see that Stonemaier has announced that they are coming out with an expansion for viticulture? And the whole purpose of the expansion, it'll be out in June, is to make it a co-op.
Yep.
So because I didn't see the whole thing because he makes these announcements on his video like when I'm working at my real job, and so I can't stop doing what I'm doing and watch Jamie. I know. But it's the idea that most people who do wine don't do it by themselves. So I'll be curious to see that rolls around. But that's one of our favorite games. So it'll be interesting to play it as a co-op. Yeah. So anyway, you said that. Now Power Grid, I've seen that game. I know it's not about a foreign entity trying to blow up your power grid. So talk to me about that.
Really
game.
Isn't.
Yeah. So what is that game about? I'm curious.
Well, it's funny it's in some ways there's not a lot of moving parts. You've got there's the auction of who gets a power station, and then you've got to spend money for that. And then you spend to put out stations, station houses throughout the map, and you've got to connect them in very particular ways. And as you go from one city to the next, you have to, pay for that first one. And then there's a connection cost for the sort of wires between them, as it were. And then you pay for the connecting to the next city. And then you have to actually buy whatever resources will fire off your power stations.
So it sort of sounds like Ticket to Ride meets SimCity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and it's funny because the first couple of rounds, particularly if it's the first time people are playing, they're like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, okay, this is, and it's easy to like, spend all your money on the auction, then go, well, now I can't buy any of the other two things. And you have to just kind of, and there are three sort of stages. And the first stage is only going to be one person in each city. Then there's two, and then the third station are three. But the game ends when somebody has 17 station houses out. But the winner is the person who can actually power the most houses. So most cities. So it's really funny because you're like, all right, I've got 17 out, but I spent all my money and I can only fire off 10. And somebody else who has 14 houses out can power all of them, so they win, even though I was the one who triggered the end game. It's kind of fun in that way. And it's interesting because the game starts off kind of slow. You're like, well, how long is it going to take us to do this? And then you get to the mid game and you're like, oh, I've got to do something now. And then all of a sudden the third round happens and you're like, and now we're done. So it ramps it's a sort of a hockey stick kind of shape, right? Where it's slow. Whoop.
We see that feeling in so many games when you feel like, particularly these games where each round you have fewer moves. So, right. We talked a lot about Wingspan. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the fourth round in Wingspan is that you finally see your pathway to do everything you want to do, but you don't have the turns.
Mm-hmm.
And
Scythe is the sort of grandfather, as it were, of Wingspan, where it's like you set up this great, amazing engine, and then the game's over.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's, one of the things, like we talked last time about Libertalia, it's actually the difference. You get more options as the rounds go on. You go from like 3 days to 4 days to 5 days or something like that. And so you have more options to do things as you go through, which is, sort of the reverse of that, but the same idea. And then that's also a Stonemaier game. So no one's surprised, right?
Right. Yep.
So that's cool. So you said Sanssouci. Now I've seen that one. Tell me about that one because I've never played it.
So Sanssouci, it's I think it's sort of funny because there's the sort of the cult of the new, and you're like super into all of everything's coming out new. And none of these games that I've been playing here are new at all. Sanssouci is even older than Power Grid. I think maybe they're about the same time. Vendita goes back a little ways. Silver Honeybuzz is, I think, 3-4 years old at this point. So it's the cult of the fully cooked. So Sanssouci is it's sort of a classic, or what I would think of as classic Euro from like 8 or 10 years ago, where you only have very few. You've got 2 cards in your hand. You play either one of them, and there's a very constrained options for what you can do. You've got one card that lets you pull a tile onto your little player board. It has to go into a row or column, and basically the color, the card that you played will give you the color that you have to pull from, and it's super tight. It's very tactical that way, but it's also it's one of these games where you're like, well, it reminds me of Ticket to Ride. You're like, well, there's just nothing I can do. The cards did not favor me. The way that they come out, everybody has the same little deck of cards, and the way that you shuffle them, the way they come out, the way that the tiles come out, maybe the gods favor you, maybe they don't, and you do the best you can. Again, very tactical in that kind of way. And so it's kind of a nice family game that way, because you can't say, I did it, I crushed you. You're like, well, it worked or it didn't. So, and I live in the Sanssouci neighborhood of Greenville. So Laura and I are like, well, we've got to play Sanssouci again. I mean, yeah.
Well, the funny thing about that is I liked where you started that, where you said, okay, this is sort of an older game. It's not new. It's not the one that everybody's talking about. And, it's interesting. I think number one, I think that's totally fine. I think there are a lot of great games out there
Yeah.
that don't need expansions. They don't need anything else. They're just fine the way they are. And that, you know, they tend to not jump off the shelf anymore because, you know, people think, oh, they're a little longer in the tooth. But, you know, these board games are not like video games where the technology keeps getting better and better and better. And you know, you know that I've been playing Elden Ring on the video game thing, which is a Dark Souls game. And I saw a documentary recently that goes back to the evolution of that game. I just noticed a weird thing with my logo. I got to flip something here. But you know, these games generally do very well for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's important to kind of go back and look at the classics, because the other thing is, let's talk about the lovely supply chain issue. The majority of these games are, although they're designed in different parts of the world, there's typically one place on the planet that goes and manufactures them, and that's in China. And the
container fact in Germany. Yep.
Or but the container ships.
But that's the two. Yep.
Yeah. So the other than Meadow, I think, is the one we talked about that was done in Poland. You know, and so that's just a logistical thing. And so it's like, I think today we're recording on Monday, April 18th, 2022. Today I got an email that my Kickstarter copy of Fjords has shipped finally, but it's like way late because of all the other things. And this is all COVID related. This isn't a political thing. This is all COVID stuff. And, but knowing my friend who owns the game store in Pineville that we talk about, you know, he's just now getting to the point where his shelves are being filled back up because it's been hard to get content. You know,
I went to our one of our great local game stores here in Greenville, Boardwalk Games, and the shelves were full of amazing new product. And I was thinking, oh my God, if I had $5,000, I'd just walk out with, you know, another 10 years worth of material. So yeah.
Well, I have through the local game store, I've asked for a copy of Arc Nova. And they didn't get their allocation, so I'm hoping that by the end of the month they'll have an allocation. Because that's one of those where I'm not going to go to Amazon to get it. I'm getting it from my friendly local game store, and so anyway.
I was there for Wendy had really, I think I had mentioned, fallen in love with Quacks of Quedlinburg.
Yep.
And so went to the game shop to pick it up again, just because I could probably have done it cheaper over Amazon, but these people are important to me.
Yeah.
So going back to Sanssouci, it's funny because, you know, it's out of print. You probably can't pick it up. It's probably, you know, you could go to the Board Game Geek marketplace or eBay or someplace that you could find it. But and that's what's interesting about the sort of way this hobby gaming stuff happens is these are small print runs for the most part, except for something like Viticulture that Stegmaier keeps, you know, Stonemeyer keeps keeping in prints, and Wingspan, these ones that sell a whole lot. Power Grid keeps being evergreen, but a lot of these games, you know, it's a 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 maybe copy run, and then it's done. And
it's funny you say that, because I think Tom Vassell on the Dice Tower, he was talking about that very thing. I want to say around Christmas time or the beginning of this year. You know, what are the games that you would like that are no longer in print that you would like to see come back in print? And I don't know if that was just because that's a thing, or if you know, Libertalia is sort of a reboot of an existing game. It's not really a reprint, though. I mean, it's different. The mechanics are different,
right?
So
and the setting's different.
Yeah, and so it makes you wonder, you know, because I'll be honest with you, because when you said that, I realized Sanssouci, I hadn't seen it. I've seen Santorini, and I just conflated the two because, you know, old. And so you're right. I don't think I've seen it in the store.
No,
unless he's
no,
got
you
just a
haven't.
really old, dusty copy that's never sold.
Yep. But it's a super fun, and it's the kind of like you've got two cards and you've got one choice. Which of these two cards do you play? You have two sort of in the Ticket to Ride version, you sort of, you know, the things that you want to fulfill. You want to make sure that these two, but sometimes again, the cards work against you and the tiles don't come up. It's a nice, and it's the sort of quintessential sort of Spiel des Jahres winner. I don't think it did win the Spiel des Jahres, but it feels that way, right? There's just a very simple thing you can do. There's one sort of expansion that comes in the box,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. And um, it feels like a fun game. It is a fun game. Laura loves it, and it feels very much that sort of old school, not old school, good lord, it's still in the early 21st century, but just this really accessible family game.
Well, a lot's happened in the 21st century.
It's been a busy century.
Yeah.
So was the last one. But the one before that was also had a lot of stuff going on.
But you bring up, you bring up the conundrum that Dale and I run into all the time, and that is, we have these. We talked a little bit last time about the shelf of shame that has the games that that are still in the shrink wrap. But
I like people who call it shelf of opportunity. That's my fave.
Yeah, we're getting there. But the thing is that like, but we love this other game and we just want to play this other game. And so, we have certain go-tos that just keep ending back up on the table, or there are things that take so long to set up that once you have them set up, you want to get them out. Yes. We love Wingspan, but Wingspan can take a little time to set up. Mm-hmm. But I really like this move by designers that are trying to put things in a box such a way that you can quickly get it on the table. Mm-hmm. It's, I know that there's like Broken Token and various, insert manufacturers. I use, I buy a lot from Ship Shape Gamer. Okay. Gamers out in Portland, Oregon. They I don't know, do some really nice work. In fact, the one I have for viticulture came from them. Oh, nice. And I've ordered one from somebody on Etsy that is for my quacks of Quedlinburg. But it still hasn't shown up, and I'm not really sure why. I need to check into that.
And I like the people who offer if you have 3D printers and other things that you can, and this sort of maker space kind of stuff that people embrace and like, willing to share files. And I was today doing a bit of other crafting around games, making sort of extra stuff for Everdell, just making, and so you don't have, there's the tree here, but so you don't have to build the tree and put it on your table. There's a couple of other things. And so I was printing one out and pasting it onto another heavier cardstock kind of, and then I got a copy of Dark Moon, which was the version of Battlestar Galactica Express, so BSG Express, that got picked up and then printed. And the copy that I got kind of bashed a little bit, and I've done some rehabbing of board game boxes in the past, and so I was gluing and using, but I love this way that we can do these, we can engage this hobby in these other sort of crafty, like you get the Broken Token stuff, you want to sleeve your cards, there's so much more of this that's about the physicality of the object of the game itself, that it's just kind of fun. I was like, I'm going to spend a little time with some Mod Podge and brushes and spray on glue. And it's just a nice, even if I'm not going to play the game, today's could be a game without playing, but just to work through and engage it in these other very physical ways feels really good.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, I'm always ashamed about how much I've spent on the Wingspan brand, but I think I've matched it dollar for dollar on the Meeple Source purchases I've made of the food and the extra birds.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
but I don't regret it at all because
Yeah,
it makes
no.
it's a better experience. And,
Yeah.
I don't know, there's the tactile nature of
Yep.
things, and such. Okay. So, I want to segue into something a little different, topically speaking. So, your semester is coming up, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is perhaps the first time you've used games as a creative writing exercise. Is that true, or did you use it in a previous engagement?
This isn't. It's not a creative. It's a.
I never know how to talk about it, so I'm gonna let you talk about it.
It's all good. So this is it's a first year writing class. So it's like, English 101, 102,
Sure.
or whatever your
The humanities.
first year.
Yes.
Yeah. Whatever your first year sort of writing thing is. So I've been using, so you want students, first year students to learn some skills about how you think about sentences and paragraphs and research and all of that. And what I did for the content was tabletop games, and that's been a lot of fun. They've, it's interesting because people don't necessarily take games seriously. There's that stuff out there, and so it's a lot of fun to sort of get them to both write and then think about what's at stake when they think about, it's a game. It's not, it's pointless. It's just silly. And then to say, no, there's a whole lot going on when we think about games, tabletop games, how we engage these topics and mechanisms. And so it's been interesting to see them sort of grow both in their thinking about games as well as writers. But the writer stuff is not necessarily part of our podcast, but yeah.
No, but it's interesting to me because I'm curious, since the semester's coming up and you've kind of gotten a sense of how did this go as a topic? Is there more for you to do with this as an educator to say, hey, and I use the term educator in this context of, you're not teaching somebody the history of games, but you're using this medium as a way to channel creativity. And I wonder if there's going to be, is this just going to be that one-off class that you do every again and now and again, and it's interesting for the kids, or if somebody's going to come to you and say, gosh, I'd like to see another level of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I don't know. I think there are a couple of them who are kind of in that space where like, this really is going to be something that's interesting. Like I can see that this has changed my thinking about how I view games and gaming. We've had a lot of readings that are academic in nature and sort of pop culture in nature. Just thinking about when you're sitting down to play a game or engage with a game, there's more that's going on. Like, what was it? We had an article we were reading. So the cover of Quacks of Quedlinburg, right? The art. And they said, oh yeah, this is another Smurfette syndrome cover. And, they had a good time with this because it's like, what does that mean, a Smurfette syndrome? Because there's one woman in a group of men are like, oh yeah. And, so part of this is getting them to just think about their world a little more deeply and to like not take an object that's presented to them and just say, okay, I'm just going to engage, it's just like whatever, I'm not even going to think about it. And so it's fun then to, again, games just seem like frivolities. People just don't, and yet there are the things that we've, like, as humans have deeply engaged and done. Every archaeological dig, every part of, as far back as we know in human history, has games and gaming pieces. We're really, really invested in this as a species. And so it's just sort of fun to watch them say, okay, all right, okay, so what does that in fact mean? Maybe it's not just something I can just ignore and throw away.
Well, and that's kind of what got
And
me. Oh, sorry.
yeah, go no.
Well, I was just saying that's what kind of got me thinking about it because I was thinking a lot recently about Quinn Smith. Quinn's is the guy from Shut Up and Sit Down, and he did that anthropological talk on
right, yeah,
sort of the history of games, and he talks about that anthropological. They found the hooves that were basically honed to be what we ultimately became dice in that whole story. Yep. And I thought that was just, in fact, I was thinking about it because I was obviously it was Easter weekend. I was at church. They were using the passage of the Bible to tell the story. And they talk about the casting of
and for our listeners, I was not, that was Joe at church, but
nobody got a report of lightning coming down and destroying a building or a man inside of a building. It's fine.
It's good. It's good. Yeah.
So anyway, back to the story. There's that scene in the Bible where they're casting lots for Jesus's clothes. And I thought about that because, that's, we can historically say, okay, that's 2,000 years ago. Plus or minus from when it was written down, et cetera, and all that sort of thing. But it's gaming. They're gaming.
Yep.
And
it keeps going backwards and backwards.
Exactly.
And backwards.
Yep. Exactly. And so to me, I think we've talked about this before, the whole idea of, Mancala, and how you'll go into even today there's villages that you'll go in and you'll find people just dig holes in the ground or little divots in the ground really and just play a version of Mancala. And then, so to your point, that's getting back to my question, is it just kind of makes me wonder because, I know Furman University really, really well. I don't think they're graduating a lot of anthropologists. I could be wrong. I don't claim to know, but it doesn't mean that there's other ways to look at topics. There's the historical, the historical side, which I think could be interesting to certain folks. But I think for me, and we talked a little bit about this the last time about how flat gaming and gaming publishing has become in terms of diversity of the games and the availability of games. And that, if you can set up a Kickstarter or you can get creative, there's ways to get your game out there without having to go to, one of the big publishers.
Yep.
So
and
I'm just curious.
One of your favorite games recently has been Obsession, right? Which is what we used to call a SGGC, a single game company.
Yep.
And Kickstarter has certainly blown that up. And Obsession was
it was Kickstarted. Yep.
Kickstarter. Yep.
It sure was.
Yep. And it's a solid game. And a lot of these games are, early when you use the initialism SGGC, it was, well, that means it's not worth a damn, essentially, unless you had somehow captured lightning in a bottle. But what interesting thing about Kickstarter is that it allows anybody who has a good idea or a decent idea to take it public. And if people embrace it, great. And if they don't, it just kind of dies on the vine. There have been a couple of interesting documentaries recently, which follows people whose projects have yep, that didn't get funded. Okay, we're going to try this again. So it makes something like Obsession a great example of that flattening that you're talking about.
Well, and it's interesting because, thinking about that, in a minute, we're going to transition and we're going to talk to Nate.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about, other people that we could talk to on this particular medium, this podcast. And the I'm going to actually reach out to the guy that published Obsession. He and I
good.
Yeah. He and I have had a couple of emails back and forth. He's just been a great guy, and I'm hoping we can get him to come on. There is a woman I'm aware of that does a very interesting thing on YouTube about Appalachia, and I thought it would be interesting if we could get her on to talk about traditional Appalachian games.
Oh, that'd be
And
awesome.
because I would like to kind of get a sense of what are some traditional Appalachian games that maybe have influenced games that we play, that we see from designers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when they came over from the old world, they brought the violin, and then they developed the banjo because there was that intersectionality of,
And yep.
yep. So,
And the banjo's from Africa. So yeah.
right,
And this is
exactly.
where, yep.
So I just
Yep.
want to see if there was any other
Yep.
intersectionality around, games that came over from the old world, et cetera. So that might be something
Yeah.
worth
That'd be
looking
awesome.
into. And then I'm also talking to the folks I mentioned previously about the table, and I thought I'd be fun to get Berkey on. I'm asking him. I don't know if he'll say yes. We'll see. Maybe
Sure.
this will help to push him along. So not for the next one, but just in future episodes, maybe having at least one or two people to talk about it and kind of talk about those kinds of things would be
Mm-hmm.
sort of interesting. So now James and I are really excited to introduce you to a game designer who lives in Charlotte. We don't know if he's from the South, but we're going to find those kinds of things out. But please welcome to Lay It on the Table, Mr. Nate Bivins. Nate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I probably should have checked this beforehand. Did I pronounce your name right?
Yeah, you got it
Okay,
spot on.
perfect. So I got to tell you this story. So obviously I'm holding one of your games, Sundae Split. By the way, in our first recording, I called it Sunday Surprise, and I had to look it up to make sure I said it right. So if you're thinking of an expansion, Sunday Surprise,
I can use that. I have
you
your
absolutely,
license.
no,
Yeah,
absolutely,
awesome.
yeah. I spew a lot of ideas that other people can make money off of. But no, but I was in the game store, and all of our listeners know, because episode 2, so we have a ton of them. That when I say the game store, I'm referring to Carolina Tabletop Games in Pineville, North Carolina. I was in the game store, and there was a woman in there with her daughter, and her daughter was probably 6 or 7 years old, and the woman and her daughter were friends with Shane, who was one of the workers at the store at the time, and I had gotten to know them, and so they asked me to play this game, and I'm like I cannot not play with a child that has just asked you to join them for a game. And of course the mom's there, and it's not creepy, weird or anything. There's full permissions and such. And so I played this game and absolutely was just blown away that a 7-year-old taught it to me, and that it was just a great experience. So I ended up buying a copy, and I've shared it with my family, and we use it as James and I were talking earlier about games that are sort of like the palate cleansers between games.
Little
And,
fillers.
and
Yeah.
this is a great game for that. So, and then and of course I was really excited to learn that, because I tell people I'm the only Charlotte native over 50 most people ever meet. I'm always interested that, like, oh my gosh, this was designed by somebody in Charlotte or in the Charlotte area. And then wait, they come into the store, so for me, that was pretty interesting. And so that's when I started thinking, wow, if we do the podcast, we got to get started inviting these people on. So that was my discovery point with Sundae Split. And it was a surprise to me how much I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. Yeah, I'm glad that it is marketed as a family game and something accessible to kids. So that was certainly one of my design goals, was to make it a game I want to play, like, with my daughter and with kids that age, and still have fun playing. So it gives me great joy to hear that.
Now,
That's awesome.
This is where James and I learned how to tee off of each other. So you'll get that dramatic pause every now and again. So we'll just apologize to people to say,
oh yeah,
on our YouTube channel, I say we are not voice actors. And on this channel, we'll say that we're not really good interviewers. But I know, what I was going to say is that I know that you have other games in your repertoire, because we checked you out on BGG. And I think that might be, I think there's some questions around there that I think James wanted to probe into. So I'll get out of the way and let James jump in on a few things.
Well, no, I was just interested in how our first episode was an origin story. And so how did you get into, gaming? How did you get into, moving from perhaps being a gamer to being a game designer? And then you've got this Sunday Split, and then you've got Book of Dragons that are kind of, one's a single author, one's the sort of an anthology, and then the other two are, that I saw, was Silver River and OP Arena, which are co-designed. So tell us about how did all of this happen, man?
Yeah. So my origin story goes all the way back to the beginning. Many people like played games as kids and then probably fell out of it. And then at some point along either college or adulthood, early adulthood, they rediscover games or they get back into the hobby. And I somehow never left.
That's
I'm like
awesome.
the eternal child. And that's part of what got me into game design is I never stopped playing. And I really think that most everyone also is a game designer. You're just not formalized. Like as kids, my philosophy is like everybody's made up games. The only difference is I wrote down the rules and tried to sell them, like,
Yep.
and even hobby gamers, you make house rules,
Mhm.
you come up with ideas, like you're game designing, you're just not formalizing it. And so I was always to that level. And then I met my co-designer that you mentioned on 2 other games, Robert Burke.
Mhm.
He's a Charlotte native as well. And he was just sort of starting publishing games through Kickstarter. This was about 10 years ago, kind of when Kickstarter really started, getting legs under it. And pretty much a light bulb came on for me. Like I'd always viewed game designers and published games as this unassailable, like Mount Everest. I am just making house rules and making my own custom games, and then I saw you can actually just anybody can do this. You can just make your own games. Like not that it's not a lot of work and skill, but there's no barrier, especially now more than ever. And so that light bulb came on, and I just almost like the night that I kind of understood that, undertook the journey of being a game designer. So that's my origin story.
And so that leads us to another question though. Is that your only job? Do you have another job? Talk about that.
Yeah. So that is not, I have a day job. I'm a civil engineer. This is very much my hobby. And I would love to say that, I make bukus of money off of game design, but all game designers do it as a side hobby. It's a nice bonus. It usually pays for my convention attendance, prototypes, stuff like that. It pays for my hobby in general, but very little more. And there are very, very few full-time game designers who are able to sustain it. Probably a dozen or 2 or 3 in the world, I would say.
Yeah, I think I can start a short list that'll cover all of that. So that tracks.
And kind of along that line, I've thought about this a lot, and I'm not sure I would want to do this as a full-time job as much as I love it, because I've talked to a lot of those people who have tried to go that path. And once your hobby becomes your breadwinner, there's a lot of added pressure. And so I'm kind of in the sweet spot. I get to do this for fun. My wife doesn't expect me to make games to make money. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. And so to me, that's the right amount of like squeezing out the fun I can from this hobby. So.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's I get that, because once the thing you love becomes the thing that you have to do, the love have to ratio starts to become super messy, and then somehow the love suffers and all of that. So, I mean, if you're lucky enough to be Reiner Knizia and you're just like, I have these things coming out of my head. Yeah. And because it's all of the math, great. But no, he's all by himself, really.
Yeah. And along those lines, I would gladly have a evergreen hit that makes me $1 million, but I'm not going to. A lot more common is the designer who has to grind, and they make 20% of their income on 5 games every year, and they have to make 5 hit games every year, and that's how they survive. And, more power to them. That is not me.
Now, you talked about your co-designer being from Charlotte. Are you originally from Charlotte, or where are you from originally?
So I am originally Charlotte-ish. I'm from like an hour west of here in Shelby. So I'm a Southern boy. I'm not too far away. I've lived here in Charlotte about the last 20 years. So I'm about as Charlotte as it gets, which is a rare breed these days.
Well, I just now know that I can just throw out the name Bridges Barbecue and we can talk for a while. I got you.
We can talk for a very long time. Yeah. That's another podcast. We got to make it now. You've committed. Congrats.
We'll have to do it from Bridges though.
Oh no, that'd be
Certainly.
awesome.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Now I'm hungry and I'm gonna have to take a break.
Well, it's
You know,
almost
maybe-
prom. It's almost prom season, so that's the time to go to Bridges to see the people that take their dates.
That's true.
Yeah.
In prom dresses, limos, they
Exactly.
park outside.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh y'all.
No, that's awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
so, and where did you go to school?
I went to Burns High School and then I went to NC State.
Okay.
Okay.
In Raleigh. And then after college, moved back to Charlotte. So I've been here ever since.
I had a bunch of kids from my high school who went to NC State. So
Yeah.
Well, so
Although-
and just for fun, James and I went to Wofford. That's how we met each other.
Okay.
I think,
Yeah,
I don't know if I
nice.
brought that
Right.
up to you
Yep.
directly.
Yeah. That's part
and
of your
and I'm from
origin story.
Hendersonville, just
Okay.
up the hill. And
Yeah.
so a bunch of kids from high school went to NC State or UNC. And
True
so
locals.
yeah. So I was interested. So you've got Sundae Split, which seems like there's this. It's such a fantastic mechanic that doesn't get used a whole lot, right? That I pick, you choose, and like I was just playing Hanamakoji with my partner Laura not too long ago, which has one of the things that you can do. You've got 4 things to do. You've got little tiles that tell you what you're going to do, and one of them is I split, you choose, and like, how did you land on that? And I love the mechanism of you like hiding stuff. Like you don't get the broccoli, I guess is the
Yeah.
So
That's a good way to phrase it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Honda Mikoji is kind of a great example of the genre. So I'm glad you brought that one up. So my inspiration for Sundae Split, which was my first game to be published and hit the shelves, but was not my first design or my first signed game. We can kind of go into that a little later. But
Sure.
I was well into my design journey whenever I came up with Sundae Split, and my inspiration was I knew about I Split You Choose and that it was an underserved kind of like genre, I'd say, or mechanic.
Mhm.
But what really inspired me was a magic card that's called Factor Fiction. And so Factor Fiction is I Split You Choose distilled into one single magic card. And it's you play it on your turn, you like draw 5 cards and choose an opponent, and they split them, and one pile goes in your hand and one pile goes in your graveyard. And it's been around for like 15 years and might have been the beginning of the genre, honestly. And so I just sort of, I don't know if I played it or saw it while playing Magic and was just like, I gotta do a game about this. And for the longest time, it was a very generic I Split You Choose game. It had just normal point scoring, pretty boring, honest. I mean, it was fun, but the feedback I was getting from most people was that it was a fun filler and not much else. And I had this moment, I don't know why, but I feel like my best design, like light bulbs, come in the shower, like getting ready for work early in the morning. And I was thinking about my game and I was like, I don't know. I'm probably gonna have to, I don't know if I might have to just like put it in a drawer. It's fine. It's not really like gonna be anything. And then, and I was trying to figure out like what could get over the edge. And for some reason, just like the social, my games, I love social interaction. I would never make a game without a high degree of like interaction.
OP Arena seems like a whole bunch of that.
Yeah. And so I was kind of like, this game just isn't me. It's sort of just like doing things on the table. I need something that's like, I'm looking you in the eye, and it sort of snapped that, it's perfect information was the problem. Everything was face up. And so when I started to like unpack that, I'm like, what if everything's not face up? Now that changes everything. Now I'm playing the player and I'm not playing the game, and it adds it's a family game, but now I'm adding this whole other element to it. And that was really like the spark that made that game from like fun to what I think is a really good family game. So
well, it's a bit more like adding cockroach poker or some of those just pure bluffing games into I Pick You Choose. That's awesome.
Exactly. And that's where my heart is. I love social deduction games, hidden trader games, cockroach poker, skull, like BSG, games like that are like my bread and butter. And so I was just that was my epiphany, was like, let's just merge a very generic family game in one of those and see what, so.
Well, and from
and Sundae Split becomes just a super accessible theme too.
Right.
Well, and from my perspective too, I mean, so, we spent the last couple of years in this lovely pandemic, and my wife and I went from playing at the game store to playing at home and pulling the games off the shelf that were, so you talk about the family component. We've been able to use Sundae Split not only as a way to entertain ourselves for a quick game. We've also done, I want to say Foxfire, but I don't think that's right. It's the fox in the
Fox in the
Forest.
Fox in the Forest.
Fox in the Forest. We've got a number of those games, and of course we've really enjoyed Tussie Mussy too, because that's just been a quick pocket game. Pull it out, and do it. But anyway, just the whole idea of being able to get that face-to-face interaction that you were talking about, considering we've sort of lost a lot of that. I mean, there was a period of the time where you'd go to a game store and you couldn't sit down and game, or you had to sit down and game in masks. And now you're finally just kind of getting back to whatever a sense of normalcy is. So I think just having those games that promote that is so important, because we crave that type of interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've started getting back into the scene, that's how much I missed it. I don't think I expected like the level of connection. Like the first time I got back with my like game group, and we were like sitting there, I could see their faces when somebody like made a great move, and like it was just it was almost like moved me to tears, honestly. Like I was just so relieved to have that human connection again. So yeah, I agree. Games that facilitate that and being able to recapture that back in our lives has been amazing.
Yeah. So you were talking a little bit earlier about that Sundae Split wasn't the first design, but it was the first one to get published. So, and you wanted to go back to this. So what was other stuff that had been in your mind that you'd been developing but didn't? Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of brings up like some behind the scenes, like behind the curtains, like things
Excellent.
about game design. I think in that there's a very long road from like having a finished game and even getting a game signed to when it hits the shelves.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've had basically before that, my very first game, for some reason, I had the audacity or naivety to just like make a very complex big game as my first game, despite all the warnings, all the research I did, all the designer friends that I knew were like, start simple for your first game. And I was just like, nah, I'm good. I got this. So with
Hold my
the
beer.
utmost hubris, I like just went into this massive game design that I worked on for probably 2 or 3 years, and it was fine. It might come back one day. It was considered for publication, and then I had another game that was signed by a publisher and went through development through their dev team, and both of those games have not hit the shelves yet. And so that's why I kind of couch it as like, and there were several other ideas and things in process, but I had at least at that point when I signed Sundae Split, I had another game that was already signed and was supposed to be coming out prior to it, and then some other games that had pretty much gotten to the finish line, and some others in progress at the time. So it was my first game, but not my first game by a long shot. Yeah.
It's kind of like the actor who makes all the different movies, and the third movie comes out first and the first movie comes out third.
Yeah,
exactly.
In that type of situation.
Yeah. It was both the combination of, so Sundae Split was put out direct to retail from Renegade Games. So there was no Kickstarter. Renegade is, top notch, like publishing firm. So they were able to get development done and art and get it published very quickly. And it was a smaller game. So the time from contract to like it hitting the shelf was very quick by board game standards, especially today. So,
well, we've talked a little bit about on this in our previous conversations around, that sort of how the supply chain has kind of gummed things up for gamers, and how a lot of Kickstarters have been delayed accordingly. And you were talking about how Kickstarter has become a medium for that indie developer. But I've also been reading some lately around how the fact that so many of the larger publishers are kind of using the Kickstarters to manage their pre-orders. Do you feel like that the air is getting sucked out of the room for that indie designer because of that?
I think it is a little bit, but I also think that as larger publishers attract people to Kickstarter, that also adds more users. So I'm not sure if it's a a net positive or a net negative. Like initially I was very much like, why do large publishers need, it's a pre-order system. They really shouldn't be, not using these platforms. But I do feel like it's organically kind of like, or inadvertently, maybe made Kickstarter the success it is. What would Kickstarter have as many users if it was just indies right now? I don't think so. So I think we have to be careful in the hobby of like shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. Anything that brings in, because we're still a very niche like market, and so anything that brings in mass market is often like issued as like not something we want. But so many new people have been joining this hobby, and that's what really is like spurred its great growth. Like this is still a very high growth like industry, hobby gaming. And so anything that supports that, I have to kind of be careful not to be the old man who's like, oh no, So I don't know the right answer.
I get the sense you're not as old as me and Joe. So yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe slightly younger, but still I'm kind of on the upper side of the demographic for board games for sure. Yeah. So
well, I don't know. I rediscovered board games in my 50s, so yeah, I don't know if you can say that.
Yeah, there's no real age, I don't think, hopefully. But yeah, to your point, I'm not sure if that's a net positive or negative. So I'm careful. I get a little prickly about it, but I'm careful to gauge like what the real impact is.
I like that because it feels like, I'm just thinking about the Kickstarters, and when I've backed them, I get links to a bunch of other stuff, and I'm like, ooh, well, that's super cool. And and some of them are, people I've never heard of. Some of them are Monty Cook, some of them are Simon, some of them are once again Kayenta games or whatever, right? Where you're like, yeah, there's just this single guy who's got a vision, and that sounds cool. I'll do that. So yeah, I'm that makes perfect sense to me. I like that attitude too. I wanted to ask about the Book of Dragons. I have this game on my shelf called Stonehenge, an anthology game, which has like it's just a box of stuff, and there's like I think 5 or 6 rule sets that go into it from 5 or 6 different designers. I'm not quite sure. Richard Garfield was one of them, and I think that's just there have been a couple of attempts to do this kind of, well, again, they called it an anthology game, and so Book of Dragons sounds kind of like that project. How did that develop? How did you get pulled in? And I noticed that yours was a social deduction game, which you've mentioned already. So I'm just curious, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So that was a project that was started, that was by Gray Fox Games. And the idea was really spurned by having a uniform like set of cards without text or any numbers or text, just the artwork. And so then they solicited to different designers to try to design a game with that constraint. You have a fixed number of cards. They're different dragon types, but that's basically like suits,
right? And
no numbers, no text, and those are your constraints. And they really kind of solicited from a wide range. There's some, as you mentioned, there's like in the Book of Dragons, there's some kind of heavy hitters. Mike Fitzgerald published one, a handful of others that are much more well known than I.
So how'd that feel to be part of that group?
It was really great. Actually, I had 2 games in the Book of Dragons. I think I'm the only one with 2 designs in that set. I have a great relationship with Gray Fox and kind of knew them personally by that point. So it was kind of like I might have gotten in the set at least with one of those games just by my relationship, which is pretty common in game design.
Oh yeah, it's a small world.
But yeah, so I just took that, like I mentioned kind of early on, I think before the show, I like constraints. I think they breed creativity, and this was a perfect example of that. If you asked me to, all right, design a game for me, that's going to be much more difficult than, okay, here's a set of 32 cards with suits and these design constraints. Now design a game for me. And as you mentioned, social deduction or anything where I have to look like Joe and James in the eye and figure out what they're thinking is my bread and butter like style of game. And so my challenge was how to design a social deduction or a social game based on that card set. Yeah, so it was a great experience. The artwork is phenomenal. I don't think it was a big hit for them or anything at all, but I do think there are some very clever games in there. But it's also very daunting if you get that box to like unpack exactly what to play. It's like you get a box and here are 30 games inside. You're never going to play all 30 games. Let's be honest.
And that was one of the things that happened to Stonehenge too, was like, I don't know which one to pick. So, but it does look beautiful, and they've got these beautiful big cards. So
yeah. It's a cool product. It was a passion project for sure. But I think just the original idea was a little lofty to have so many games in one box. Yeah.
So these games that you have, how long have you been actually publishing the games? Has it been since 2010 or?
Yeah, probably 20. Yeah, probably 10 to 12 years.
12
I'm not
years.
sure.
Okay.
I'd have to go back to look when it started. And I definitely took a design hiatus through COVID.
Right.
And I've kind of restarted designing games probably at the start of this year, I'd say. So.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question, because I would think that, if you had all this time to be at home, that probably was productive for you from a design standpoint, not assuming things with your day job and family, et cetera. However, I would think too that one of the key things is the play testing to make sure that you're getting the kind of feedback. Is that what's sort of been the barrier for you there?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of designers, I think all designers either went one or two tacks. They adapted and went virtual through Tabletop Simulator and online playtests, which were huge during the pandemic, or they did like I did and kind of like paused or hopefully paused their design. And that's the route I went. And actually it certainly was the physical, like face-to-face playtest. Like I said, that style of games I like don't really lend themselves that well to the virtual format. They're not typically engine builders or games that don't require a high level of interaction and like social nature, I guess. But the other thing, honestly, was the lack of convention attendance. Okay. So I use conventions are where I pitch my games and play test my games. And without that like external motivator and deadline, I just found myself lacking motivation, honestly, which is, was a big problem for me. Like I had ideas, but I wasn't in the same space without that external, like, okay, Origins is coming up. You got to get your prototypes ready and like work on them. I'm a slacker. What can I say? I usually like the weeks leading up to any convention are when the vast majority of my work gets done. So.
See, that's exactly
engineers are notorious for being slackers.
Exactly.
That's exactly how I wrote papers in college. I totally understand that. That's
And so, I mean, it really affected me in a way that I did not expect. I thought like I'm going to have all this extra time since I'm not going out to like hang out with friends. And I had extra time and it was great. I pretty much used it to spend with my family instead of game design though.
That sounds like time well spent.
Oh, it was certainly. Honestly, I feel recharged and like kind of like I'm going to hit it harder over the next few years probably. Because like you mentioned, Joe, I'd been doing game design for 10 or 12 years and I have a few games already under my belt. So it wasn't like I've like reached my pinnacle, but I had already kind of achieved some of my goals, I guess, and was looking to branch out or figure out what's next. And now I feel like I have a much more clear vision of where I want to go like over the next 10 years.
So James and I have been talking in the last episode about, the fact that we play D&D together. So we like that type of gaming. My wife has gotten into the game with me as well, gaming with me, but not RPG. She likes the tabletop games.
Right.
And both of our children are out of the house. And so this has sort of been our part of our second act has been board gaming. And, what I had said to James previously is that my wife likes games where you don't have to be mean to each other in order to win. And so games like Wingspan and Parks and stuff like that kind of come to mind. And we like games that are not necessarily cooperative, but they're engine building type of mechanism. That's one of my favorite kind of mechanisms, is the whole engine building. So I'm curious, is there a game mechanic or engine type of thing that you haven't done in a game, but you'd be curious to do because it would challenge you as a designer? Is there anything out there that maybe inspires you to look at it from that perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are games like that, but there are games that I've worked on or I'm working on, I think, that I'm trying to make probably in process, I would say. So I love deck building and have been working on a deck building game for like 6 years. It's been very close to the finish line a few times. Well, I don't think I'm allowed to say this. AEG had it basically at the finish line, like almost ready to order art, and then they got kicked back to me. They had to make a thumbs up or thumbs down decision, and finally went thumbs down, and they were terrific to work with and did a huge amount of dev work on it. Another publisher had it in development. So I think it will be a game at some point. It just never made it quite there yet. And deck building is kind of that engine building genre that I'd like to explore. That doesn't have to have kind of the take that or the, any like negative interaction, I call it. It still has interaction, just not negative.
Right. Well, I would think
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just gonna say with your passion around getting people to look each other in the eye. Yeah. It just seems to me that there's an interesting marriage there, if you will.
Yeah, there really is. But I do recognize that, that's my play style, and my first few games definitely went that path. But I started to branch out a little bit more. And so an interesting kind of anecdote is in the Silver River, which is a very big, like epic 4X game.
Yep.
We very strongly considered multiple play styles for that game. And so in that game, whenever you start the game, you have to choose your objectives for the game that will give you victory points from a common set of cards. And the objectives are tailored to play styles, like being aggressive, being more economic, a handful of political, scientific, kind of the different play styles of the game. And you'll choose a handful of them. And so it leaves you a path to victory that does not necessarily include negative interaction. And then we kind of went a step further in something I would want to reuse in a future game. So we had these cards that kept giving us a very difficult, conundrum. So they're take that cards. You can get them from a common deck. They're like instant speed. You can play them whenever, and they just hose your opponent. And I insisted that they stay in the game. And my co-designer, Robert, insisted. It was like, look, we're getting some negative feedback, like 50-50 split. I think we got to take these out. We got to can them. It's just some people just hate them. And so the clever compromise that we came up with that I think more games should use is the cards stayed in the game, but they say basically take 2 things from Joe, and Joe chooses, take 2 things from Joe, or you get to go up on this track that gives you a victory point. And so now, if Joe really doesn't like that, he hates that negative interaction. And by the way, the 1 victory point is way better for me than taking 2 things from Joe. Like Joe should always choose to take that part, but it gives Joe a choice in the matter. If he really doesn't like the negative interaction and takes umbrage with it, then he can choose the other path. And so I think, it certainly goes into my design decisions now as a little bit more aware gamer that these are my preferences, but there are many, many types of fun, and try to design for all these types if possible, when a game has enough space to allow you to do so.
But isn't it fair to say that, not everybody likes every style of game, so you can't please everybody. So you have to please what your creative process is revealing to you.
Oh, for sure. I think some games should just do what they do the best.
Yeah.
Like if you have a bluffing game, make the best bluffing game you can. Right. But some games, especially larger, more epic games, I think have the space to try to like at least cater to some other styles of play. And so, I think
if you're going to do skulls, it's just going to be skull. Yeah. You can't pack anything else into it.
Right. If I tacked on a rule that like accommodated people who don't like bluffing, it's going to just water it down to a muddle mess. But some games do have the space where it's really comes down to a design decision. When you have these problems, you have to figure out how to address it. And sometimes the right answer is it's just, not for that kind of gamer.
Yep.
Too bad. We're going to just stick to our guns. Our design goal is this. We're going to do it. And some design decisions are, there really is not like that. That's a perfect example. Putting the caveat on that card that Joe chooses and can choose a non-conflict path doesn't detract from the game at all, in my opinion, and caters to that play style. So
No, I think that sounds like a great compromise, and in fact, a really, really insightful compromise where it sounds like that's an even better place to be than the originals. So that's pretty awesome. And I like the fact that and that feels like something that maybe comes out of working with a co-designer, is like getting that feedback and negotiating and figuring out that space. And that's a really good thing also to recognize as we're thinking about games as either critics or gamers or authors, is it's never going to be for everybody. You need to know what your market is and know who your target's going to be. And if it's not that, that's okay. That's one of the constraints too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That I've learned a ton working with a co-designer. I think it's been hugely beneficial, and just playing games with different style gamers, like outside my little circle. As I've gotten more into the industry, I'm playing with more strangers, which, sometimes they're just like, this game is not for me. And then I ask like, leading questions about why to figure out. And I really think that is key. But it's also, as a designer, so my process, like one of the crucial things is having clarity in your purpose, in your game design purpose. And so every design I do starts with like a mission statement, a 2 or 3 sentence that I'm like circling on the first page of my design notebook for that game. And every decision points back to that game. And it can be revised, that mission statement. Sure. But if your mission statement is to make the best bluffing game possible, then you're not compromising. If your mission statement is to make a game where, it rewards multiple play styles and caters to this, that, and the other, then when you have that question that comes up that you have to make a design decision on, it's very easy just to look back and be like, okay, we need to make a concession here and figure out how to like solve this problem. So anyway, that's
and that sounds like great advice for anybody else too. It's like, have that mission statement, have that vision, and just keep going back. That I haven't heard that before, and that strikes me as like really powerful.
It sounds pretty common sense. Like you should know what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's surprising.
I think people don't always. Yeah.
Do you bring that? Do you bring that philosophy? Do you bring that philosophy from your day job?
Maybe, and being like an engineer, you have to have very, like intentional like language and clarity and purpose. So I think that informed it. And I'm probably not the first to come up with that or anything. I just you in playtesting other people's games and playing like published games, you kind of come across that as sometimes you'll find a game that's a little muddled, certainly in your prototypes from your designers, and you'll ask them like, maybe like why did you do this and not this, and they were like, I don't know, it just sort of seemed okay. Like, it's like, okay, you need to like, was this the kind of game you want to make? And they're like, I'm not sure. And
well,
that's where it's,
As you were unpacking that, my brain immediately went to the Lost Ruins of Arnak, because there's so many different mechanics in that game. There's deck building, there's engine building, there's different ways that you can get to victory based on your preferred play style. And they've got a whole hodgepodge in that game, but I don't see a lot of games that have effectively pulled that off as much as just being able to do it individually with this type of genre or that type of genre. So when you were kind of unpacking that, it just kind of got me thinking that, wow, that kind of makes it more of a unicorn than I thought about from that perspective.
Yeah, and an interesting way, this is sort of a challenge. So what I do is when I play published games, I try to like at least mentally write what I think the mission statement was. And so when you play a game, think about, what do you think the designer was like? How do you condense that in like 1 or 2 sentences? So like Arnak might have been like, I want to give the feeling of being Indiana Jones, exploring things in the jungle, but also have a tech tree and be able to like fight monsters. And so you could almost see like this guy, probably had a handful of things he wanted you to experience while being Indiana Jones style adventurer. And there's your mission statement. Now everything that's in the game points back to that. And you can there's your elevator pitch for the game.
Very different than I want to rescue a bunch of cats off an island.
Very different.
Also super fun.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of the things I wanted to touch on just a little bit, I think, just because our brand is a little bit knocking microphones around, our brand is a little bit of thinking about Southerners and gaming. And is there something that you think of as particularly Southern in your approach, or has some of this informed like how you've thought about games, or just a sort of a regional thought here?
Yeah, I think we've alluded to it a few times already, but I think the very social nature of games and my desire to want to play against the player rather than like do my own solitaire, multiplayer solitaire. I think that's very Southern. Not to say other regions don't have a very social aspect, but I think the core of board gaming to me is a Southern, virtue. It's not exclusive, but the camaraderie, the feeling of sitting around a table, in my opinion, having a beer with people that you may know or may not know, but that share a common interest is, and that level of respect afforded to all, and like hospitality is Southern, in my opinion. And that's what Joe mentioned, like Carolina Tabletop. When I go in there, I feel at home, and that, inviting atmosphere is sort of regional, in my opinion.
That sounds good.
And that permeates, that does permeate my design philosophy. Like, as I mentioned, those are the kinds of games, at least in my first decade of design, that I was really striving to publish.
I also want to be mindful of your time. We had said about half an hour or so, and we're closing in on 45 minutes plus. So,
well, we could probably at some time in the future get Nate to come back.
Absolutely.
That'd be awesome.
I'd
love to.
And now he's just figured out he's got 2 more play testers he could be working with.
That's very true. Plus, we have the barbecue podcast.
The barbecue podcast. Yeah, we got to go to Bridges, and then we'll have to,
Yeah, exactly.
Then we'll get a bunch of comments in the towel section below that says, well, you didn't go to Lexington. That's right.
And they'll be wrong, but that's okay. All play styles, different strokes for different folks. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. It's been amazing. I certainly would come back on. I know we have a ton more to discuss. And, I could talk for like a couple more days if we had the time.
Well, so. and it sounds to me like we could probably do that as well. But I do want to kind of, we try to keep these to about an hour in length, and so we've kind of got some other things, but we would absolutely love to have you come back. And of course, if you do find yourself at Carolina Tabletop Games, would love to bump into you there, and maybe even I'll get the person that taught me this, and we'll get her to take you on head to head and see how you fare against the pro.
Probably very poorly. I tend to lose every game that I teach of that game. So I'd love to. I'm there a lot of Thursdays. So
okay. Okay. I stroll in and out of there all the time.
Yeah.
Just because.
Awesome.
Of all that. But anyway, Nate, thank you once again. It's been a real pleasure to finally meet you in person and learn more a bit about you and have this conversation. And I look forward to more in the future. And I look forward to your continued success and your hobby as a hobby.
Yeah. Thanks again, Joe and James, for having me on. And happy gaming, y'all.
Okay. Great to meet you. Happy gaming, man.
All right. And so that wraps another episode of Lay It on the Table. This is episode number 2. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode number 3. And we look forward to figuring out some of the mechanical things that we were talking about earlier about the music and the licensing and all of that stuff. But hopefully we'll get all that stuff sorted out. And just as always, thank you for listening and or watching. And James, take us home.
It's been a pleasure, everyone. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and may all your tiebreakers break your way.
There you go. Goodbye, everybody.